Goodbye, Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. Hello everybody and welcome. Well, it looks like Tower of Terror might finally be getting that dreaded retheme that none of us have been looking forward to, and I am not too happy about it. With the recent news about Muppet Vision 3D going away with the new Monsters Inc. land arriving there and the Rockin' Roller Coaster retheme, it looks like Tower of Terror is now on the chopping block. As you know, Muppet Vision 3D at Hollywood Studios has been replaced and will be rethemed with an as of yet unnamed show in that building for the new Monsters Inc. land coming to that area. Now that entire area is being replaced and rethemed, as we've mentioned in previous videos. We've got the new Monsters Inc. roller coaster there. We've got Pizza Rizzo's being rethemed to Harryhausen's, and so that entire area is going to be replaced. As part of that, they've now announced that Rockin' Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith is now going to be replaced with Rockin' Roller Coaster starring Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, which I am not too happy about. I am a big fan of Rockin' Roller Coaster just the way it is. I don't think it needs any changes other than some updates, make it a little bit smoother, modernize it a bit, fix the speaker systems, but I really don't want to see it go. As far as Muppets go, Muppets are okay to me. I think they're fine. I don't dislike them. I don't love them tremendously. With Muppet Vision 3D going away, that doesn't bother me as much as this announcement about the Aerosmith going away. Now, I realize that Aerosmith has had some problems in the past and maybe they want to distance themselves from that brand, but there's something bigger here going on that I don't think a lot of people realize, and that is the systematic removal of non-Disney IPs from the Disney parks. Over the years, they have been one after the other replacing any intellectual properties. These are brands, these are IPs, these are things that are recognizable like Moana or Marvel or the Avatar, Pandora. Those things, they have been removing those things from the park that are not owned by Disney and replacing them with things that are owned by Disney. You look at things like the Muppets. They introduced the Muppets into the park. They purchased the Muppets in 2004. You look at Avatar and Pandora. They purchased 20th Century Fox in 2019. Star Wars and Lucasfilms, they purchased that in 2012. Along with that came the rights of Indiana Jones. The Marvel Universe, they purchased that in 2009, so we've got Marvel attractions. Even going back as far as Pixar, that was purchased by Disney in 2006, so we've got things like Toy Story Land. You've got things like Tron that were just created, Tron Light Cycle Run, that was always owned by Disney. Now, Bob Iger has recently come out and announced that IPs are the future for the Disney parks. And I have a couple of quotes here that I want to read to sort of illustrate this point. Bob Iger says, "If you analyze carefully how we achieve those returns that they are receiving on their investments in the parks, it was all about the IPs. In addition, they decided that almost all of their investments in the parks in terms of attractions and lands would be using those IPs, and it's very, very clear what those IPs delivered for them." Essentially what they're saying is that the IPs that they introduced into their parks were what generated the most interest and the most revenue for the parks. Now, what he's not saying there is that the IPs they've been introducing are doing a few things. One, they are Disney-owned IPs. They're not introducing IPs that are not Disney-owned. It's also becoming clear that the way of the future is IPs, not original ideas. That's a very important point. If you know anything about Disney, original Disney, a lot of Disney parks were based on original ideas. Yes, we had things in there like Snow White, but we also had things like Haunted Mansion and Space Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean. These were all original ideas that were not based off of an IP. And so as the years have gone on, we're having less and less original ideas that are outside of IPs. Now, it's not saying that Disney isn't coming up with original ideas. I'm not saying that, because they're coming up with an original idea like the Moana film. So they come up with Moana, they create Moana's film and the music for it, and then they own that, and that essentially becomes an IP for Disney that sells an amazing brand and lots of merchandise. And then they create attractions in the parks based on those. But it's very different than buying or leasing or renting out an IP that somebody else owns. An example of this is Epic Universe, how they are essentially leaning in and doing the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Now, Universal doesn't own that particular IP, but they are using that IP and paying fees for it. And Disney is essentially saying they're not doing that anymore. They're gonna stop doing that. They haven't announced and said that they will never use an external non-Disney IP, but their actions are showing us that they're moving more and more away from that, and they're systematically removing anything in the parks that was not Disney owned. So if you look back at all the attractions that they've been shuttering, all the attractions they've been replacing and retheming, they are all either non-Disney IPs, or they are older IPs that are no longer relevant, even if they are Disney owned, or they are original ideas that are not an IP at all. Let's go back and look at Maelstrom, for example, at Epcot there in the Norway Pavilion. That was an original idea, something they created, and they removed it and they put in Frozen. Tough to Be a Bug, an older Pixar IP that's really not relevant anymore. They're now replacing that with Zootopia. Splash Mountain, obviously very old, based on the different materials and things, and they replaced that with Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Ellen's Universe of Energy. That was an original idea, something that was really kind of cool. They replaced that with Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. The Living Seas, again, original idea, replaced with Living Seas with Nemo. You've got the Great Movie Ride, which housed all sorts of homages and scenes and things from really popular movies of the time. That was removed and replaced with Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. And then, of course, we have Rock and Roller Coaster, starring Aerosmith, now being replaced. Aerosmith is out, an IP that is not owned by Disney, a brand, a group, if you will, a band. They don't own Aerosmith or their music or rights to it, so they're replacing it with Muppets because they own Muppets and Muppets Electric Mayhem. And then, just to add more, there was a Tower of Terror, Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Disney's California Adventure. That existed, and they replaced it with Guardians of the Galaxy, Mission Breakout. So we have a Twilight Zone Tower of Terror that has already been replaced, which was a non-Disney IP, because Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is owned by Paramount. Now here's what all this means. With all of the changes that they've been making over the last few years, and with Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith now being replaced, Twilight Zone Tower of Terror is the only remaining IP in the Disney parks that is not owned by Disney. It is the last bastion of non-Disney owned IPs. There is a Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Walt Disney World and Hollywood Studios, in Disneyland Paris, and in Tokyo Disney Sea. Again, as I mentioned, Twilight Zone is owned by Paramount, CBS, Paramount Global, and you may say, hey, well, maybe they're gonna buy Paramount. Maybe they'll buy Twilight Zone out from CBS, out from Paramount Global. They could do that, right? What if they wanted to buy them? You know, that tracks. They're buying up Marvel, they're buying up Lucasfilms, they're buying all these things. They could buy Twilight Zone, the brand, and own it and keep it Disney IP, and then keep Twilight Zone Tower of Terror the way it is. Here's the problem with that. Paramount was up for sale. It was up for sale this year. A few months ago, it was up for sale. Disney could have done it then. If they were thinking about buying Twilight Zone, if they were thinking about buying Paramount, they could have made a play for it and purchased it then. As it is, they did not. Paramount went to Skydance Media instead. So it is highly unlikely that those IPs are going to be changing hands anytime soon. Which means it's pretty much all but guaranteed that at some point soon, Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror, it's going away. It's going to get rethemed. Something's going to happen with it. There's just no way that they're going to keep that that sort of outlier non-Disney IP. There's just no way they're going to keep it. They're going to try and get out from under it in some way, shape, or form. So that begs the question, what's it going to be? What are they planning to retheme it to? So let's look at a few of the most likely scenarios. First is, of course, Muppets. Woo, Muppets. I really hope not. I don't know anybody that thinks that that would be a good idea, but it is possible. Muppets, and here's why. With Rock and Roller Coaster changing to Electric Mayhem, It's also been rumored that the Lightning McQueen Racing Academy, which is right behind Rock and Roller Coaster in that space, that now shuttered attraction, which is becoming a villains show. It is a temporary villains show, which people are speculating the reason they're doing this temporary villains show in the Lightning McQueen Academy is to sort of like vet out maybe what types of villains people are really resonating with, who are the villains that people are really all about, testing different things in that space so that they can be more informed for when they create the Villains Land over in Magic Kingdom. And so they're putting this temporary villains sort of show and pavilion in that Lightning McQueen Academy space. However, there is also speculation that eventually, once Villains is out of there, that could become a replacement for Muppet Vision 3D. They could essentially update Muppet Vision 3D and put it in that show building there over by Electric Mayhem, which would sort of start to create a small little Muppets area. Well, what's the next most logical extension to that small Muppets area is clearly Tower of Terror, which is in the same exact location. It sort of finishes off that area. You could create spaces between the two attractions, so it really could become a Muppets area. So that retheme of Muppets Tower of Terror is not outside of the realm of possibility. This is probably my most disliked idea of any of them. I don't know that it's gonna happen. Disney hasn't said it's gonna happen. This is speculation, but I really think that would be a massive fail for me because Muppets takes any of the eeriness, scariness totally out of the equation. It makes it very, I feel like Tower of Terror is fairly kid-friendly already, but it just adds a level of ominence to it being Twilight Zone. It's kind of interesting. I think Muppets would just kill that. So I think that is a really bad idea. And I also don't particularly want a big Muppets area. I'm not a huge fan of Muppets. I don't feel like a Muppets Land is needed or wanted by anybody. Maybe there's some folks out there that want it. I just don't think it has the huge pull that some people think it has. So I just don't see that happening, but hey, you know what? It could very well happen. The next idea, of course, is Guardians. It could very easily retheme to Guardians Mission Breakout, similar to the Disney California Adventure version. Though Disney doesn't have any rights to use Marvel this side of the Mississippi over on the East Coast, they have to be on the West Coast side, the west of the Mississippi, due to their deal that they have with Marvel and the purchasing. Guardians doesn't fall under that. So that's why we're able to have Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind in Epcot. So technically, they could do a Guardians retheme for Tower of Terror. Now, I personally think that Disneyland's Mission Breakout Guardians of the Galaxy replacement retheme for Tower of Terror is horrible. I do not like it at all. I know a lot of people love it. From what I understand, the people who liked the Disneyland Tower of Terror like the Guardians of the Galaxy version better than that. I don't know how many people who love Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Hollywood Studios think that Mission Breakout is better than that. There may be some of you out there. I don't know what you're thinking because to me, I'm not a fan of Mission Breakout. I'm not a fan of the Twilight Zone version that was in Disneyland. It's different. If you've never ridden it, it is a simple up and down experience. It doesn't go up and give you a show and then the vehicle doesn't come off of the elevator shaft and drive around and then eventually do a fall and an up and down. It is literally just an up and down drop tower where it just kind of does this a few times and there's like some of those little show windows as you're kind of going up and down. It tries to have a show, but it doesn't do nearly as much as what Twilight Zone Tower of Terror in Hollywood Studios. So for me, I'm not a fan. And I'm also not really a big fan of the theming of the Guardians of the Galaxy. It's kind of cute and kind of fun, but it's not ominous. It's not really that interesting. I'm not a fan. I know people love it. Some people are like, it's better. I don't know I don't get it. To me, it's busted. Now, the biggest fail for me with retheming it to Guardians would be destroying the aesthetic of it. I'm not a fan of the Guardians of the Galaxy aesthetic of the Twilight Zone building or the Tower of Terror building in Disneyland. I think it would destroy the sightlines. It would destroy the visual aesthetic that is there at the end of that street at Hollywood Studios. And moreover, it would destroy the aesthetic from the Morocco Pavilion there at Epcot, because you can see the back of Tower of Terror and they've sort of colored it and shaped it and did things to the back of it so that it fits in Morocco, but it also still kind of fits with the way it even looks on the front of Tower of Terror, like the way they've done it, I don't see that you can pull that off with a Guardians of the Galaxy, with the blues and the electrical and the piping and everything you'd have to do. It would just look really weird if just the back of it looked like Morocco. I don't feel like it would fit. So that would totally destroy sightlines. Of course, we've proven that over the last few years, it doesn't seem like Disney cares that much about sightlines anymore, unfortunately. They continue to break that and just be like, I don't care, I'm just gonna build a giant warehouse and paint it blue and hope nobody notices this giant, huge box sitting out there because it's colored the same as the sky. So again, I feel like that's a mistake. The next option is, I don't know, Frozen Castle? I mean, that rumor's been going around for a while. I think it was an April Fool's joke at one point. They were like, oh, Tower of Terror is going to get rethemed into Frozen, Elsa's Ice Castle. Now, I will tell you that one of my favorite events that ever happened at Hollywood Studios was the Frozen Summer Celebration that they did. That was like one of my favorite all-time. There was it was snowing in the main streets. There was a Frozen show. There was Frozen fireworks. It was the Frozen Summer of Awesome. And I was a fan of that, but I would not be a fan of them reimagining Tower of Terror as a Frozen Ice Castle. Again, I think that is a totally off-the-wall April Fool's joke thing, so I don't see that's going to happen, but hey, you know what? Maybe. Now, one of the things about Guardians of the Galaxy and that rumor is last year for New Year's celebration over in Disneyland Paris, they actually did a Guardians of the Galaxy mission breakout theming on their tower. So they used projection mapping to make it look like Guardians of the Galaxy for that celebration, and had a lot of people speculating and sort of panicking that maybe they were going to retheme the Paris Tower of Terror into Guardians. Now, that hasn't come to fruition, obviously. It was just projection mapping, but it's just interesting that there is a visual of a change to the one in Paris. Obviously, they continue to use projection mapping on the tower to do things like a cool Toy Story variation of the Hollywood Tower of Terror. I think it looks cool as a projection map. It's kind of neat, but if that were to turn, if Tower of Terror were to turn into that permanently, I would cry many tears. Tears would be shed. And then they've done Frozen, obviously, made it kind of look like Frozen for the holidays and things like that. So projection mapping is fine, but a permanent replacement, that's a fail. Now, this brings us to our most likely retheme for Twilight Zone, and that is simply dropping the Twilight Zone part of it. Just calling it Tower of Terror. Just remove the Twilight Zone element altogether. Switch it into something more thematic, like a haunted mansion, some sort of scary haunted mansion version of the story of Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. And just drop the Twilight Zone part of it. I think this is probably the most likely thing to happen. I would probably be in favor of this as being the least damaging way to retheme Tower of Terror without really upsetting me. The thing is that Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, it is an iconic attraction and visual for the park. It is essentially the icon of the park. Originally, the Chinese theater, that was meant to be the icon for the park. You think of Spaceship Earth, the Epcot Ball, you think of Cinderella's Castle at Magic Kingdom, the Tree of Life at Animal Kingdom. Hollywood Studios, it's the Tower of Terror, flat out, plain and simple. You can say Chinese theater all you want, it's the Tower of Terror. I mean, it's all over their merchandise. When you see the 4 park logos, the 4 parks all put together on a t-shirt, it shows those 4 things, and of course Tower of Terror is the icon there. Even on their guide maps, you look at their guide maps, guess what's there? Tower of Terror, not the Chinese theater, not Rock and Roller Coaster, Tower of Terror, not Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, Tower of Terror. This attraction has been here since 1994. That's 5 years after the park opened. It's been here forever. It is iconic, and I see really messing with that and changing the outside visual and changing the story and the ambiance and the sort of eeriness that it's supposed to bring is gonna crush it. This would be a colossal mistake. Colossal. So for me, the least painful is to just remove the Twilight Zone piece of it. That's most likely what's going to happen should they retheme it. So there you have it, Tower of Terror on its way out. Unfortunately, Twilight Zone is going to be on its way out. I don't see it lasting much longer. I think it's a mathematical certainty at this point. No more non-Disney IPs. Those are going away, as we said. It's just one after the other. They're dropping like flies. But hopefully, if there's a silver lining, we get the version that is just dropping Twilight Zone. So I'd love to hear what you think. Will you miss Twilight Zone Tower of Terror when it goes away? Are you excited about the prospect of something new? Are you a fan of a potential Muppets retheme? Or do you have other ideas for what you think would be a great Tower of Terror replacement? Love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know if you've heard any rumors. What do you think it's going to become? Will you miss Twilight Zone? And that's all I got for you, so thanks again for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification so you know when the next video drops. And until I see you next time, the Noble Way is the easy way. Bye-bye, everybody.